final years of the 7th century BR were a time of great progress throughout western immoren, as the consolidation of strong kingdoms throughout the Thousand Cities era allowed for an unprecedented stability amongst the human nations. The movable type printing press was in common use by then, and the device would allow for the spread of information and scientific advancements such as alchemy, steam engines, and piston-driven machinery. Todoran shipwrights constructed the first steam-powered ocean vessels in 620 BR, and the first locomotive was developed in Kursk not 2 decades later. As the century drew to a close, the Cards were busy laying the groundwork for the world's first rail line. This would be the first of many achievements that would come to an abrupt halt as the end of the 6th century began. The following is a detailed timeline of the Orgoth invasion, occupation, and rebellion in western immoren. Some events will be glossed over and visited at another time and date of my choosing. Until then, only pertinent events that happened in this particular time period will be covered in this video. 608 BR. A vast Orgoth armada lands on the shores of Golgast Island and begins construction of the great fortress of Der Drakenrun. This would serve as the main staging ground for the initial Orgoth conquest, as well as a coordinating base for reinforcement fleets and for slaves and supplies sent back to the homeland. The Orgoth began undertaking a series of raids and probing attacks along the Immoresian coast. 600 BR. Orgoth black ships entered the Severed Reach and land on Oak Island to begin the initial incursions of mainland immoren, beginning with attacks against the Cardic Empire. 597. Orgoth forces advanced south and destroyed the Cardic village of Borsovin, north of the Great Zerach Lake. Borsovin's enslaved inhabitants began construction of the Orgoth city of Udvorgen, which would serve as the northern capital of the Orgoth Immorese Empire. 597. The Todoran Armada, currently at the height of its power, archives several minor victories against the Orgoth fleet. 593. The Battle of 1,000 Sails. In the bloodiest naval battle in the history of immoren, the whole of the Todoran Armada is destroyed after ambushing a combined Orgoth fleet on the Dying Strands west of Golgast Island. Following the victory, Orgoth forces destroy the Todoran city of Corbin. Concerned with the Todorans' ability as shipbuilders and seafarers, Orgoth generals ordered the majority of the populations of this and other coastal settlements to be slaughtered rather than enslaved. 593. Orgoth black ships raid the town of Larkholm and burn it to the ground before landing at Hingehold in western Caspia. There, priests and war witches conduct dark ceremonies to consecrate the Orgoth invasion, slaughtering the local populace to the last and casting their mutilated bodies into the sea. Slaves are gathered from outlying areas to begin construction of a naval stronghold at Hingehold. 592. Black ships sail up the Ronar and into the city of Tordor, at the site of present-day Meren, to seize the city and enslave its populace. The nation soon falls to Orgoth control. Todoran slaves began to construct a massive Orgoth navy fortress on the Five Fingers Islands. 591. A massive slave encampment, today known as the Warrens, is built north of Five Fingers along the newly constructed road to Todor. 589. Thurian and Caspian river vessels began making organized raids against Orgoth outposts, but achieved no substantial victories. 588. Black ships advanced to the Lothpool River and reached Cardove, but initially find their forces insufficient to overwhelm the city. 586. Thuria and most of the Midlands fall to Orgoth control. The lands south of the Dragon's Tongue and west of the Black River are consolidated into a single Orgoth province. 584. The Orgoth conqueror Cardove subsequently demolishes much of the city and uses the enslaved populace to rebuild the area. During the construction effort, raw iron is discovered beneath the city and within the surrounding hills, which is then heavily mined to supply the Orgoth war effort. 581. Conquest of the Kardic Empire stalls temporarily as Orgoth forces advance into the Kardic Empire's southern Voyevodska. 569. In the final defeat of the Kardic Empire, Orgoth forces conquer the Umbrian capital of Korosk with an extended siege. 557. The Orgoth begin the construction of a series of fortresses and temples along the Wormwall Mountains. 542. After a prolonged siege, the Orgoth seize control of the fortified city of Leirin. Rhynier and eastern Umbria are consolidated into a single province. A massive army advances from Rin to the southern border of Rule, eventually penetrating the outer defenses of the Hogenhold and initiating a 3-month assault that nearly overwhelms the Hold's considerable internal defenses. The invaders' losses are so staggering, however, that Rule is declared unassailable from the south. Original plans to establish a foothold in Rule and from there begin the conquest of both it and Ios are put on hold. This conquest is never resumed. Korska, considered by the Orgoth to be a hive of insurgency, is destroyed and its population slaughtered. 538. Seeking to expand their holdings beyond Gallerglass to the remainder of the Scarred Islands, Orgoth black ships destroy a Sataic's fleet sent to intercept them. In response, the Dragon King Lord Toruk personally takes to the skies for the first time in centuries and annihilates the whole of the Orgoth fleet within proximity of the islands. The Orgoth would never again challenge the nation of Krix. 517. Orgoth forces destroy Fort Riker, a holdout for a small but well-armed fiefdom of defiant Moridanes. 503. Orgoth priests began construction of the Temple of Guard, deep within the Thornwood at the site of the ancient Moric ruins. Over the following decades, thousands of saves would be brutally tortured and sacrificed to sanctify this temple. 481. Having seized most of the centers of human authority in Western Immoren, Orgoth governors institute policies to shift their focus from pure conquest and towards the improvement of their current holdings and infrastructure. Orgoth generals work towards the domination of small and remote human settlements and begin the century-long process of tracking and eliminating organized militant groups. 462. Orgoth tyrants order the capture and execution of inventors, scientists, and alchemists. This includes the systemic destruction of printing presses and a wide variety of printed materials. The Church of Morrow undertakes efforts to preserve and hide as much lore as humanly possible. 433. West Caspia falls to Orgoth control, effectively granting the invaders absolute power over Western Immoren. The walled city of Caspia is by now the only significant settlement to remain free of Orgoth control. 392. The Orgoth formally outlawed the Order of the Wall, by now recognized as a subversive militant organization. 376. Orgoth war witches establish a remote outpost within the ruins of ancient Arsenia. 321. To consolidate trade along the region's major waterways, the Orgoth began construction of the city now known as Corvus, at the confluence of the Dragon's Tongue and Black Rivers. The city will eventually serve as their regional seat of governance. 289. Having long since disavowed her family name and life of relative privilege, a woman now known as Rowan ascends to join Morrow after a decades-long effort to ease the suffering of the masses. This indisputable evidence of Morrow's compassion further spreads the teachings of Morrow and escalates the decline of the Menite faith. 243. In retaliation for harboring known rebels, the Skirab city of Porsk is burned and its population executed. 150. The Mar alleged to have imparted the gift of magic on humanity, portents of which bestowed on her most devout avokees. A cabal of occultists, called the Circle of the Oath, is believed to have been based along these first portents of the gift. 140. Overcome by strange visions and shunned from their connection to the divine, Iosian priests, excepting only the priests of the goddess Skyra, are driven insane. In the subsequent years, some Iosians would link this event to the rise of human magic, a theory that eventually gives rise to the retribution of Skyra. 137. The first known human sorcerer, a Thurian named Mordruva Draga, kills 3 Orgoth soldiers near Tarna. In retaliation, Dagra and his entire family are hunted down and killed, and Tarna is razed. 129. The Orgoth expand existing subterranean prisons underneath their 5-finger naval base, creating a facility for interrogation, torture, and the ritual sacrifice of rebel wizards. 96. Sebastian Kerwin publishes the Dissertations on the Thumological Formulations, a study in the control of magic using specialized runes. 81. Kerwin institutes the Arcanist Academy, the first known assembly of wizards in Sorel. 73. Kerwin publishes The Essence of Divine Magic. 69. Dominic Kavanagh, a disciple of Kerwin, organizes a raid to free over 300 Thurian slaves. The Orgoth retaliate by tracking down and executing all those responsible, including Kavanagh himself. Believing the Church of Morrow to be responsible for the uprising, Orgoth tyrants commit the Vicarate slaughter in the city of Farin, killing over 500 priests of both Mennite and Morwen faiths. 67. Kerwin and his followers joined the Circle of the Oath, but quickly changed its purview, turning it away from esoteric Thamorite mysticism and redirecting its efforts towards the systemic refinement of arcane principles. 64. Kerwin publishes Synthesis, thus essentially inventing Mechanica. Considerable effort to copy and distribute arcane lore began around this time. However, these efforts ultimately allow Orgoth spies to trace the Arcanist Academy back to Sorel. 63. The Orgoth destroy the Arcanist's Academy, allegedly killing Kerwin. His body is never found. 59. Aganist Nerek, Kurik's most powerful disciple, reorganizes the Circle of the Oath. Under his direction, they establish safe houses in Sorel, Farin, Marin, and Merywyn. 54. The Orgoth commence a brutal purging of Arcanists known as the Witch Hunts, ultimately shattering the Circle of the Oath. 25. In their continuing efforts to combat the Orgoth, several members of the Circle of the Oath form the Order of the Golden Crucible in Lirin under the cover of studying simple alchemy. 1. The Orgoth governor stationed in Farin Fortress prepares to send a tithe of 8,000 slaves across the Meridius, included among them all the prominent Mennite and Morwen priests within the city. Outrage over the incident provokes a general uprising of the citizenry, which is assisted by the Order of the Golden Crucible's distribution of alchemical weapons. The Orgoth governor is slain along with his war witches, and word of the success sparks a wider rebellion against the Orgoth. The first organized rebellion calls itself the Iron Fellowship. 7 AR. The Iron Fellowship is destroyed after its leaders are captured and publicly executed by a cadre of Orgoth warriors and war witches. This does not quell rebellious sentiment in the general population, however, but incites it. Those slain are deemed martyrs to the cause. 16. The descendants of Cardic and Umbrian horse lords ride into the mountains terrain near Rule to undertake organized raids against the Orgoth. 25. An occult scholar named Nivara, considered by many to be the rightful successor to Kerwin, ascends as the scion of Thamorite wizards and sorcerers. 28. Order of the Golden Crucible Aurum alchemist Oliver Goulvant invents the first firearm, utilizing alchemical blasting powder to propel lead shot. 32. The Battle of the 100 Wizards. The city of Tordor is liberated with the aid of over 100 alchemists, arcanists, and former students of Kerwin and Nivara, led by the Archbishop Cortus Vendral. 40. Largely recovered from their defeat at the Battle of the 100 Wizards, the Orgoth recaptured Tordor and put all arcanists to death. Many arcanists and alchemists escaped south and east, followers who would eventually aid in the construction of the first colossals in Caspia. 79. Golden Crucible alchemists, having improved their initial firearm designs to employ pin-locking firing mechanisms, began producing firearms in large numbers in secret foundries beneath the abandoned Merwin Colosseum. 83. The Riplung Plague begins to take incredible toll on the Orgoth and Immoren alike. 84. Rainier is liberated by an army of rifle-wielding revolutionaries known as the Army of Thunder. 85. The Army of Thunder cuts off Orgoth's supply routes in Midfast and Meren. 86. The Battle of the Thunderhead. The Army of Thunder repels 10,000 Orgoth in Lorin with battle magic, alchemical grenades, and massive volleys of rifle fire. Lorin remains free, marking this as the first major victory of the rebellion. However, the Orgoth reclaim the remainder of Rainier. Thunderhead Fortress is constructed in Lorin as a base for the Army of Thunder and the headquarters of the Order of the Golden Crucible. Though the Army of Thunder endures heavy reprisals and suffers losses to the Orgoth in subsequent years, they maintain their hold in Lorin. 87. The Orgoth developed their own firearms, known as Black Drakes, precursors to the modern scattergun. 93. The Riplung Plague, after killing thousands in Rainier, Tordor, and Caspia, is cured by an arcanist and alchemist named Corbin. 102. Corbin ascends as the patron of alchemy, astronomy, and the arcane. This is taken as a sign of Morrow's approval of arcanists who apply their powers towards the greater good. 107. Using the arcane principles of Kerwin synthesis, Victor Beard creates the first arcane runeplate. 111. The Fraternal Order of Wizardry is founded by Victor Beard in the warren of tunnels beneath Cyrell. 124. Order of the Golden Crucible Aurum Magnus Phineas Brainbridge creates a prototype alchemic dynamic accumulator capable of storing arcane energy for an extended period of time. 147. Umbrian horse lords led by Prince Bruvian Sepesic and joined by an army of Ryish nomads liberate Korsk and Roshchik from Orgoth control. 149. Umbrians and Cards endure a siege at Korsk, and with the support of the free cities of Caspia and Lorin, subsequently repel the Orgoth attackers. 155. An alchemist named Maximilian Nevin, after joining the Fraternal Order of Wizardry, creates the first cerebral matrix, a device capable of limited reasoning capacity. 158. Using the cerebral matrix, Nevin and apprentice Elias Declan create the first man-sized automaton, a precursor to the era's colossals and the modern warjack. 164. The free cities of Korsk, Roshchek, Lorin, and Caspia form the Iron Alliance in Merrywind under the leadership of the newly formed Council of Ten. The Iron Alliance declares open warfare against the Orgoth. 177. After being smuggled from Surin to Caspia, Declan proposes the creation of Colossals to the Council of Ten, utilizing a more advanced version of the cerebral matrix. 178. Taking an unprecedented role in outside affairs, Rule agrees to assist human nations in the construction of colossals and begins smuggling metal, ore, and crafted components into Caspia. 181. The Iron Alliance begins construction of secret colossals. Eisenberg is liberated from Orgoth control. 185. Cards begins construction of their own colossals. 188. The Orgoth discover Cardic plans to create colossals and thus turn their full might against colossal foundries in Korsk. This subsequently gives rise to rumors of betrayal from Caspia or Rule, creating a resentment amongst many Cordorans that persists to this day. 191. The first colossals are completed and marched out of Caspia to destroy an Orgoth fortress near Farin, the first of several to fall as the Orgoth are driven from the southeastern territories. The decade is consumed by an ongoing struggle. The Iron Alliance faces setbacks as the Orgoth learn to target their battle wizards controlling colossals, which requires a shift in Alliance tactics. Support armies are mustered and fielded alongside colossals with the protection of their controlling battle wizards as their highest priorities. These wizards would later be considered the precursors to the modern Warcaster. 201. The Orgoth initiate the Scourge, destroying the vast majority of their records and structures, poisoning wells, salting fields, and slaughtering thousands of slaves before being driven from the shores of immoren. Their retreat is consolidated their forces on Golgast. Though the armies of Krix have never before stood against the Orgoth presence on Golgast, for unknown reasons, this policy is reversed. A Crixian fleet attacks and captures black ships at port anchored along the Dying Strand, while a vast thrall horde forces the stranded Orgoth to fall back to the walls of their Drakenrung. There, the Orgoth endure a 4-month siege. When at last the forces of Krix breach the Drakenrung's walls, Orgoth war witches initiate a suicidal counteroffensive that annihilates the city, destroying the remaining Orgoth along with most of the Crixian attackers. Though it would take centuries for Torek to replenish his forces, the attack is considered a great success as Krix recovers a wealth of knowledge and mystical artifacts from the vanquished Orgoth. 202. The Corvus Treaties are ratified by the Council of Ten, creating the Iron Kingdoms by defining the original borders of Signar, Kador, Lael, and Ord.